Well, hi, folks. So I'm Brian Curry. I'm your town
crowd
planner.
coming, Brian. I'm sorry. I have a crowd coming. They couldn't find parking.
I got it. Mark that down as late, please. So this is the January meeting of the Local Emissions Planning Committee. And on this agenda today, we're going to be discussing the multi-hazard mitigation plan. Now, you may recall, as vividly as I do, that we brought this plan to you over the last 2 years, back in September 2014. And we sent a preliminary draft of comments up to MEMA-FEMA back in the spring of 2015 on that very draft plan, preliminary draft. And we got back from our federal partners, a fairly lengthy list of things that we should be looking at doing. And so town management and the Board of Selectmen decided that in order to expedite the planning process and move things further along, $20,000 was appropriated at the town meeting for the purposes of doing just that, and Woods Hole Group was hired as the town's contractor to address those MEMA-FEMA comments and put the plan into a form where it would be ready for submittal sometime this spring. So the purpose of our meeting here today is to have Elise Leduc from Woods Hole Group go over this plan as it's been modified and adapted according to those MEMA-FEMA comments. We would hope to be able to close the public comment period here after this meeting in the next, say, 30 days in order to get it in front of the Board of Selectmen sometime in the spring, probably right after town meeting. But, I never try to pinpoint a specific date because, it can be difficult to do that. But I thank the chief and the committee for the time to do this. It's very important that the process identify a public process and some inclusion with interest groups. This is a committee that certainly has a broad interest group, both private and public sector in the planning document. So having said all that, Elise, you want to take it away? And this is Elise Leduc from Woods Hole Group.
Thank you, Brian. If at any point you can't hear me, please let me know. For anyone who came in and signed just the LEPC attendance list or didn't sign any list at all, there is a plain sheet of lined paper over there. As Brian mentioned, one of the important parts of getting this plan approved is to fully document the public participation process and the planning process. And in doing so, one of the things, and I'll talk about this as I go forward, that we actually added to the plan was we documented those original LEPC meetings that happened. We put in an agenda. We recreated minutes based on watching the recorded versions of the plans. So it would make my life easier if we had an attendance list from today to add to document this particular meeting as well. What I'm going to go through today, we will be talking about the multi-hazard mitigation plan that Woods Hole Group did work with the town to update. We're going to go through the schedule and the process up till now. Brian sort of went through a brief part of that. I'll talk about the major changes that were required based on that review of that preliminary document that Brian had submitted to MEMA in the first place. We'll go through some of the major sections and results from the draft final plan as it is now, and then talk about how we move this forward from here. So the process, he described this, there were those meetings back in 2014 with the LEPC. It was initially submitted in December 2014. It was on the website pretty much since then to receive any public comment that existed. The comments came back from MEMA in April 2015 to really outline all of the specific pieces that were missing that need to be added before the plan can get approved. As he mentioned, Woods Hole Group was hired, we were hired in May. Since then, we've been working really closely with a few of the main town officials, specifically the Department of Public Works, Fire Chief, Police Chief, the Town Planner, the GIS Department have all been integral in pulling this together. And right now, we have what is a draft final plan for public comment. So it is currently on the website. I'm not sure how many of you have had a chance to look at it, but I encourage you to do so. It really becomes a better plan the more input and collaboration that we have on it. And again, I mentioned one of the pieces that were lacking from the original draft was the public involvement process. And the stars on this flow chart sort of indicate where public comment and public input was possible. So it really has happened all along, it just wasn't well documented. And that's one of the things that we have done and we'd like to continue to do as we go through and submit this plan. So the major changes that the MEMA reviewers suggested, they have this rubric. It's literally a score sheet, and you have to hit every one of their requirements. And everything that got an X in that far right column were something that was not met. And that's something that we focused on as we were putting together this update. And so, as you can see in this first part, the planning process, how to document the planning process. So that's exactly what this is trying to do as well. So document these meetings, document the attendance, document the minutes. All of that will be included in the appendix. It will be described in the report. How did you involve neighboring communities? This time we submitted a copy of this final draft plan to all the neighboring towns, to Sandwich, Bourne, Mashpee, to the Martha's Vineyard towns, and see if they had any comments or suggestions. And how was the public involved? And again, I keep mentioning that, but that is one of the highest scoring components of this plan, involving the public. And so we've done the best we can to involve them. Here we are in a public forum. It's a televised public meeting. It's available on the website, and it's something that we have already started to receive comments back from citizens on. The second subset of their scoring comes down to hazard identification and risk assessment. It makes sense, it's a hazard mitigation plan, so you have to identify the hazards that your town is likely to experience. Those hazards have to include at least every hazard that was listed in the state plan. So there were a few missing from the original draft, some of them that don't really make sense. Landslides, tsunamis, things that we don't really think about as being an issue here in Falmouth, but the state addresses them, so we at least have to provide a comment on it in our plan. You know, so we say tsunamis exist, but maybe they're not the biggest risk factor here. We could add more than that, and we did, and I'll discuss that, but in this version of the plan, we made sure we included every one of the hazards listed in the state plan and fully documented the location in town that they occur, the extent, how bad can they get, documenting previous occurrences of any of those. So when were the last hurricanes, when were the last nor'easters, where were the floods that have happened in town, how likely they are to occur, and what kind of impacts are likely to come about from them. And then the second step from that is, okay, well, the risk happens, but are you actually vulnerable to that risk? So what properties, what critical facilities, what town infrastructure are really vulnerable to any one of these hazards? So we fully documented that in this plan as well. And then probably the most important part of the plan moving forward is this mitigation strategy. So you've identified all your problems, you've identified which places in town are vulnerable to those problems, so now what are you going to do about it? And so a couple of the things we were missing in the original draft was, documenting what the town already has in terms of capacities for dealing with these. Documenting your staff, your capabilities, the regulations and policies you already have in place that you can draw from to move forward with some of these mitigation actions. And then really identify those actions and prioritize them. So how are you going to protect your structures? How are you going to increase community awareness? We'll go through those a little bit more, but those were the things that we added to the plan to really make it complete, to meet all of MEMA and FEMA's requirements. The final couple, the first section D doesn't really apply to us. That's simply for the update versions of the plans. This will apply to Falmouth in 5 years. If this plan gets approved this year, in 5 years the town will have to update it to maintain compliance with the regulations. And then finally, we had a note from MEMA that To complete section E1, we should include a draft letter of adoption by the Board of Selectmen, which is easy to do. And so we will include that in here as well. So what does the report look like? This is the cover of the report as well as an outline of the sections that are in there. Pretty basic introduction, sort of an overview of the community, a local profile, that hazard identification and vulnerability assessment I talked about. What are the mitigation measures, and then how to move the plan forward, the plan maintenance process and adoption, as well as a number of appendices that really document the whole process and some of the data going forward. So I'm going to go through each of these really quickly just to give you an idea of what's in the plan. The introduction, again, simply describes the objectives of the plan, describes the planning process. How was the local emergency planning committee involved? How was the public involved? How was the local planning team, which is what we're calling the town planner, the GIS department, the chiefs of police and fire, the Department of Public Works. How were they involved? What was everybody's role? And again, it's one of the things that are really just required for getting this plan approved. You have to document your process. And the idea behind that is if all the staff in the town turned over in the next 5 years, the new staff might not know how to go about it. So if you document what you did, it will help in the process in the future. The other thing this does is it lays out how the plan is organized. In order to, one, note for ourselves that we met each of the requirements, as well as to facilitate the review by FEMA and MEMA, we added a little key to the margins everywhere in the plan that says, this is where we meet this requirement, and this is where we meet this requirement. So there's no hunting around, there's no vagueness about whether or not we met every one of their requirements with this plan. Chapter 2 was just an overview of the community. This includes things like history of the town, geography. It really just sets up, where are we? What are we talking about? It provides some extra information such as land use. This will come in more important when we talk about the vulnerability assessment. This is a map of the land use in town broken down into 10 categories: residential, commercial, public services, etc. If at the end of this presentation anyone wants to look at any of these maps in more detail, I can pull up larger versions. So if you can't see these right now, just kind of hold it in your head and we'll come back to them. There's also demographics, infrastructure such as evacuation routes, critical facilities. These also come into play when we do the vulnerability assessment portion of the plan. These were identified by that local planning team, things in towns such as schools, fire departments, public services, libraries that are crucial either in an emergency or crucial to making the town run as a town. That would be, it would be horrible if they were lost, either to the community or to the emergency response. Historical properties were also documented, as well as repetitive loss properties. This was something that was definitely added into the new version. In going through the process of pulling this new version of the plan together, we worked really closely with Shannon Jarboe, who is the CRS coordinator for Barnstable County. She advised us that at this point we would be remiss if we didn't go through and add in the CRS requirements into the plan. So that had an extra couple check boxes, including documenting the repetitive loss properties in town, as well as also mapping and listing them. The town has chosen to keep that as a private, separate addendum to this report because it is a little sensitive to start picking individual properties around town and saying, you are a repetitive loss property and you are a repetitive loss property. So we are still meeting all of the requirements by submitting that as an addendum, but don't have to make it an actual public document. But there is a general description of why they are repetitive loss properties. They're on the coast, they're in vulnerable areas. And so that's what this chapter documents. Chapter 3 is that hazard identification chapter. As I said, we had to document every hazard that was mentioned in the state plan. Those include all the ones with the asterisks, which are almost all of them. So that's everything that the state plan had. Number 12, landslide. The state had, but we decided we don't have landslides. And so we mention it, we included it, but we don't have a whole section on it. We don't go into the risks and the probabilities. We simply say, our planning team doesn't really think landslides are a risk here. We also added a couple. So the state plan does not mention sea level rise as a specific hazard. We do in this plan, as well as when we talk about dam failure, which was a specific hazard in the state plan, we also talk about culvert failure. There are a handful of dams in Falmouth, but they are small, and they are not a significant risk. However, more risk is probably due to if some of the major culverts were to fail, if they were to stop up or collapse, a lot more impact would be gathered from them. So this is an example of what the flood hazard map looks like. We also have, maps like this for many of the hazards. These are the erosion rates across the coast and town. This is the sea level rise risk, depending on where you are. And this is from the Barnstable County Wildfire Preparedness Plan. These are just risk levels of wildfire, depending on what part of town you're in. And so we have something like this for all of the hazards. It sort of gives us an idea of which areas of town are more or less vulnerable. And all of these hazard identification maps help feed into our vulnerability assessment. So critical facilities or properties within a high hazard area for flooding popped up in that vulnerability assessment. Sorry, one more. So this was also where the culverts and bridges of concern in town were. So in terms of hazard identification, once we had all those hazards, we ranked them based on the likelihood, severity, and area of impact. So that first column, likelihood is low, medium, or high. Severity, minor, serious, extreme, or catastrophic in area, isolated, or town-wide. And depending on which column in any one of those categories they landed in, they got a slightly different score. And when you kind of add up all those scores, you get this cumulative risk on the right-hand column. So things that come out highest are things like severe winter storms and nor'easters, flooding, and high wind. I mean, things that we experience all the time. We just had a major snowstorm a couple weeks ago. I know I live in Bourne, and we lost power on Monday because of all the wind. I don't know what happened in Falmouth, but things happen, And so those are the things that we are more likely to experience. Things like tsunami, sort of one. So not really a high risk hazard. So partially using this table and these scores, but also based on where we had spatial data and where in town it actually happened, we selected a certain subset of these hazards to move forward with the vulnerability assessment. So even though nor'easters and severe winter storms scored very high in this chart, because when it snows, the whole town gets snowed on, there's really no way to suss out the difference between the vulnerability here versus up in North Falmouth. Everybody's going to get snow. But it is different when you talk about flood zones. Someone on the coast is obviously going to have more of a risk for flooding than someone inland or at a higher elevation. As you saw on, say, that wildfire map, there are sections of town where the forest and the fuel is just more conducive to a wildfire than other areas. So we were able to take the hazards like that and move them forward with a vulnerability assessment. So those include the ones on here with the asterisks. So flooding, coastal erosion, sea level rise, hurricane and tropical storms, high winds, fire, and dam and culvert failure. Those were the things we had the data for that were spatially distinct about town that we could move forward with. So the next chapter is just that. It's the vulnerability assessment. And we did this two ways. We did it based on parcels, and we did it based on the critical facilities. For the parcels, the properties in town, we grouped them based on land use type. And the land use types we used are in this table on the left-hand column there. So residential single-family, residential multifamily, commercial, public services, agriculture, recreation, etc. The rest of the table simply describes what falls into public services or what falls into commercial. For the critical facilities, on that map I showed you earlier in the presentation, there were 92 of them identified throughout town in various categories. And so we also looked at which of those individual facilities fell in any of these particular hazard areas. This is just an example. There's a table like this for every one of those hazards I just described. But this is what it looks like for the parcel values. This is a little bit of a busy table, so I can walk you through it a little bit. No, I can't. I will walk you through it over here. So the land use category, so those are the 10 land use types I just described. So we binned all the parcels in town into those categories. That first set of information, the number of parcels, tells you, for example, the residential. There are 18,410 residential parcels in town. 1,301 of those fall in a VE zone, so that flood risk zone. So that's 7% of your residential properties are in that flood zone. And then we broke that out into value of those properties. So how much total value of residential properties do you have, and how much value of your residential properties are in your hazard, and what percent of that value is in that hazard. So there's 14% of the single family homes, the value, 14% of the value of those homes are in a VE flood zone, but only 7% of the parcels are. So that means these are higher value homes that are along the coast that are probably likely vulnerable to flooding. We did it for buildings and for total property separately. So the total property also includes the value of the land. For something like a flood, the flood may destroy some of the structure, it may destroy the building or the amenities on that property, but is not likely to destroy the land per se. And so you may want to look just at the value of buildings that are at risk as opposed to the total value of the property, and that's why this is broken down both ways. At the bottom of each of these pages, we also list the critical facilities that fall within that zone. So within the VE zone, there are a number of the critical facilities. So we have the Coast Guard Station, the Harbor Master Shack, the Woods Hole Drawbridge Hut, and one hazmat location. So these critical facilities, in addition to having different categories, fire department, school, library, we're also broken up into tiers as ranked by that local planning team. So the ones that were crucial to emergency response, fire stations, police stations, were ranked tier 1. Things that were crucial to the town but might be less important in an actual emergency were ranked lower, say a tier 3. So a library might be tier 3, except perhaps if it has important documents, that might bump it up to a tier 2. So some of the office buildings you don't think of as an emergency response, but they're still just as important to the town because they have valuable public records, let's say. So maybe that got bumped up higher in the tiers. So all that ranking was done by, not by me, I simply absorbed their information, but by the town, what was important to them. So this is just a second example. So this is with sea level rise at 3 feet. Again, it goes through all the values of the different parcel types and then lists the critical facilities that are vulnerable to that. And again, there is a table like this for every one of those hazards in the plan itself. Chapter 5, in my mind, is the most important section for the town, and it's also the most important section for all of you and for the public to review and comment on. Because this is really what the town is going to be held accountable for moving forward. These are the actions that the town is sort of signing up to do to reduce their risk moving forward with these hazards. So the town came up with 34 actions to meet 7 goals that they had to minimize the impacts of natural disasters. And those actions were broken into 5 categories. So you have prevention and resource protection, public safety, property protection, structural projects, and public information and communications. And the number next to each of those categories are how many of the mitigation actions fit into each of them. So there were 9 in prevention and resource protection, 3 in public safety, et cetera. The example on the right is simply to show you what kind of information was laid out for each of them. So there was the name of the action, so in this case, the reconstruction of the Fresh River outlet on Surf Drive, including a roadway culvert and outlet groin. A little bit of a description of purpose. Why do we want to do this? Why is it important? The town responsibility, so what department is responsible for carrying this out? In some cases, there was just one. In some cases, there was a lead department with maybe some supporting departments. Where might the money come from? And so these are different for everything. So sometimes it's from a town operating budget, sometimes it's from grants, sometimes it's from department budget itself. So it depends on the particular action. And then the town actually the planning team actually went through and prioritized all of these actions, high, medium, or low. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. And then gave a timeline. Is this something we're going to do in the next year, in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years? Sort of what's the time horizon on putting a project like this together? So how did we prioritize them? So basically we looked at 13 different criteria for each of these actions. And they really broke down into what are the benefits are we going to get from each of these actions? What's the feasibility of doing it? What does it cost? And what are the regulatory and permitting constraints for moving this action forward? And this next table is a little bit busy, so don't freak out. It's, it's really just to show you what this looked like. So this is just an example of the mitigation actions that were in the prevention and resource protection category. So there's the 9 of them there, and then all of those categories across the top that I just had on the last slide, and then how they got scored. 1, 2, 3, good, average, poor. 3, 2, 1, good, average, poor. And then how the scores finally came out on the right, that total score, were binned into low, medium, or high for our ranking. And so that was the process the planning team went through. The last 2 sections of the report are Chapter 6, which is simply a brief description of how to maintain the plan and move the plan forward in the future. How to monitor and evaluate how you're doing, how to check off which one of these mitigation actions you've actually completed, and how to continue to involve the public moving forward. And really the point of this section and the point of this whole plan is that it's not meant to be a static document. This document is not meant to sit on a shelf and be forgotten. It's meant to be opened, it's meant to be used, it's meant to be changed. As your risks change, as facilities in the town change, as you perform some of these actions and actually reduce your risk to certain hazards, the plan should be updated to reflect that. And so going forward, this sort of highlights how to do that. And then finally, plan adoption. So once the plan is approved by FEMA and MEMA and is then hopefully adopted by the Board of Selectmen, this chapter will document that. So right now it's mostly blank because neither of those things have happened yet, but there's a placeholder for it. So where do we go from here? So we are in this first box. We are at the LEPC meeting in January of 2017. There is an ongoing public review open of the online draft of this report. It can be found, there's a link to it right from the main page of the website, but the website is also right there. This moving forward schematic's a little flipped. So originally we thought we would present at the Board of Selectmen meeting and then close public comments, but I think what actually makes more sense is, as Brian just mentioned, if we close public comments 30 days from now, prior to going to the Board of Selectmen meeting, that gives me time to compile them all, respond to them, and update the plan so we have a final version moving forward into the Board of Selectmen meeting that they can actually approve and okay to submit. At which point, hopefully March, April, we will submit to MEMA and FEMA for review. That process at that point can take 6 months if all goes well. And so hopefully by September you hear back a big okay. So I know there was a lot of information, and it was mostly just to give you an idea of what we've been doing, what's in the plan, what the purpose of it all was. I'm happy to take any questions and or pull up the plan itself and look at any of it in more detail if anybody would like that. Yes?
Just a question about the whole process. I did read through the plan briefly.
Good, someone read it.
But I'm curious that based on all the ranking and the mitigation analysis, hazard analysis, does MEMA or FEMA actually put a score, if you will, for want of a better term, on Falmouth as a community in general? You know,
So
as
if
to
you
whether
were
it's
to rank-
vulnerability or potential for funding or any of that?
No. So you could rank things low versus rank things high, and as long as you had a reason for doing that and a process for doing that, all they're looking for is that you have this plan. What they can use this to rank you on is the CRS program. If that's something that the town chooses to move forward with, if they want to apply to the program, having a multi-hazard mitigation plan that meets the CRS requirements is like a first step into that program. So they're not ranking you on what's in this plan so much on how you rank your vulnerability to hurricanes or nor'easters. They're just ranking that you have a plan moving forward for your town on how to deal with those things. So, not really, I guess.
Just a quick question on each one of those hazard locations, there was a timeline. Are they going to hold to that timeline and be checking to see if those projects are completed during that 3 years for the fresh river?
So no one's going to come back in a year and knock on your door and say, did you finish all those ones that you said you'd finish in a year? What you will have to do is at 5 years, when you go to update the plan, you will have to check back on all of your mitigation actions and document whether you completed them or not. What status are they in? So maybe if you couldn't get funding, and so something you thought you'd complete in 2 years, you only started at the 5th year mark and it's not done yet. They just want to see that you're progressing. You obviously can't say, oh, we didn't do any of these.
So is that 5-year mark, is that when we get reestablished again and go back in for another report? We have to update the report, or 5 years?
It's, hopefully it would be something that you could do internally. I mean, Woods Hole Group would be happy to help you again, but I think for an update, it's really, most of it's there, right? You just have to, change out some of the data, fluff up some of the tables with recent, if you had any major snowstorms or floods or hurricanes in the last 5 years, you want to document those.
No, I think it's just a little personal. I'm not sure what we put in for our time frame, so.
No, I hear you. But really, it's, you're going to do some of them.
Yeah.
And so you document what you've done, and you then maybe reassess at that point, and maybe look at it with more realistic goggles at that point and see, okay, well, that was an unrealistic timeline, so let's change the plan moving forward, reassess what actions we're proposing to do. And that's, again, this is not a static document, it's not set in stone, it can be changed. But it's a guide. But you'd want to do some of them. And I think,
Where can that be found, on that website?
Yeah, right?
No, we reviewed it, we went through a lot of the
You're
projects.
DPW, right?
Yeah, we did a lot of the projects, some of them have already been done, so.
And that's, honestly, we put those in there to help you. Because we didn't want you to do projects, I mean, there were some that you were just finishing, some that you had planned that you're definitely going to do in the next year. We didn't want those to fall through the cracks. We wanted the town to get credit for those. It's something you're doing that is reducing your risk, that is helping mitigate some of the vulnerability. And so by adding those in, even though you seem like, it sounded like they were all, done and checked off, in 5 years you can say they're done and checked off, right? So you'll get like a B+.
Good.
Under chapter 4, you had that chart, you mentioned assets that are, I guess, considered a risk, and one of them, there it is. How can I find out the exact location of that hazmat location under WHOI? Exactly what it is? You don't have to announce it to the group, but I want to know. I want to know how this got on your radar.
So there is a list of all the hazardous materials facilities with the fire department. They have to be documented. The town needs to know where they are.
Yep.
When I was speaking with Shannon Jabro, the CRS coordinator, who helped make sure that we were including all the right things in this plan so it would get approved this next time around, we asked her, said, well, what is really a critical facility? What should we really be mapping? Because we had, some things on that list originally that were maybe not critical facilities. We had, like an ophthalmologist's office. So it was a medical facility, but probably not an emergency medical facility. But we did not have any hazard areas. And so while those things are not important in helping you fix the emergency, there are things that you really need to know where they are if there is an emergency. You don't want those hazardous materials facilities, gas stations, and flood zones. You want to know where they are in case you have to go triage that during that. So the critical facilities map is in the report. And there is an appendix to the report that lists out what they all are. So it is all in there. But a lot of things are, you wouldn't really think of. So there's, the hospital is probably a hazmat facility. So it's not a scary thing per se.
So just because we're on this, it doesn't necessarily mean there's an action item.
No. So there's, but if you are the WHOI hazmat facility and you would like an action item, you should comment, and we can add that.
I believe that we mitigate our risks for any given scenario. We can talk about that.
Absolutely. And so this is the input that a meeting like this is supposed to draw out. So if there is something that you're already doing that we should document, I'd love to hear that. If there's something that you want to do in the next 5 years that we should document, I would love to do that as well. And so you and I can talk offline after the meeting if you'd like. What's your name, by the way?
Ron Wright.
Okay.
I'd like to also offer that, on the hospital side, from an HVA, from a vulnerability analysis perspective, how they align. And so ours is basically required on an annual basis. And I'd think it's probably important, maybe we should have a discussion so that you can understand where that allegiance and alliance can kind of lead up to this mitigation process.
Okay, absolutely.
Be happy to share some information.
Good.
And that, I think, Lisa, that's important to note is that a lot of our stakeholders, MBL, the hospital, they all have their own mitigation plan as well that they share with us. And so we work in a team in that regard because a lot of the information that they provide, we keep on our laptops so that if there is an incident in that area or at the facility, we can pull their plans right up and work in conjunction with them.
And honestly, that sentence you just said may just be what needs to get added, because this plan cannot necessarily add actions taken by private entities.
I'd like to add to
right?
that, we
So-
definitely collaborate on
Yeah.
drills, we've given tours.
Absolutely.
We don't operate in a vacuum.
And I didn't doubt that you did. But it's good to document, but I don't think necessarily the plan for the hospital, the plan for Hui, doesn't need to be in here, because these are actions that are taken by the town. You're in the town and you're important players in the town, and the collaboration is hugely important. And I think it's that collaboration that maybe needs to be better documented right now, so.
Lisa, so you suggest that once this gets accepted, instead of waiting for 5 years, as we do projects, we put an addendum into the existing document with some documentation of when things were done and what the costs were?
I wouldn't call it an addendum, but definitely documenting things as they're done is going to make your life in 5 years so much easier. And so all of you folks that are on that list of, departments in charge, I mean, keep a little file somewhere, or, I don't know if it's the planner's job. I mean, someone in town should be just compiling this, like every time one of these things happens, put it in a folder, and just, you don't even have to think about it, just put it in that folder, and then break that folder out at the end of 5 years, and there's your update, right? So you don't have to go back digging through old files you can't find. If you document it along the way, it'll be so much easier.
Just so, Elise, real quick, just so everybody knows, the state, NEMA puts these mitigation plans on their website. They don't put the exact plan, they just put the date it was implemented, because every 5 years, like she said, you have to redo it and get it approved. Because your mitigation grant funds or anything like that, you can't get unless these plans are in place. So, and like you said, it's not static. You're going to see buildings come off the town's rolls that were considered critical facilities at one time. They're no longer. So they put together a good plan here, so you guys are really set, the table's set.
But more than anything, I encourage you to review the draft that's online and submit comments through the planning department or to Brian directly, and he'll funnel them to me. And that way we can make sure that we're incorporating everyone's concerns and ideas.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Are you going to provide that PowerPoint to the public or to Kim?
Yep, I can get a copy of that to the town.
So thanks, Elise, that's a great job. So like I said before, we're going to try to, on real good advice, close the public comment period so we can get everything in, compiled, in a form that's ready for the Board of Selectmen, hopefully, probably right after town meeting time. It's online, it's the planning office is compiling all the comments. I would ask that you not call Woods Hole Group directly, only because, it can get a little confusing. It's on the webpage, or if you just call, Belinda will take them down, we'll compile them up. It goes into an actual appendix, what those comments are and how we address them. For the requirements, and hopefully then off we go. To our next exciting adventure, which is keeping the Department of Public Works nervous about this.
Just a quick question. In soliciting public comment, what method of media are we reaching out to the public to let them know that they can review this?
We're on FCTV.
There was also an article in the paper that I think you instigated that announced that
There was
this was
just
happening.
an article, at least online.
It happened in the physical paper too.
And Brittany is here from the Enterprise today. hopefully we result in full disclosure and get some good public comments back. We have already received some on the webpage, and we forward them off to Elise, and we'll address them. So at least through the electronic media and paper media, we're reaching out to our citizens.
Do you feel that there's another avenue? that we
No,
should be-
I think, as we've always said, communication remains our greatest challenge, so, the objective of, if anything, I'd say, repetitive, meaning
Does the-
in the paper more than once.
Does the town have a Facebook
Yes,
thing or a Twitter or some other?
I put it on my.
Not yet.
We most certainly, though, through the emergency management, on the emergency management page does have a Facebook, and the fire department
So
does.
if you would like to
We
post
most
the
certainly
link
could
or?
put, we most certainly could put the link up.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, that we could, boy, probably do it.
But will you?
The chief says we can do it.
It's probably already
He's got his
done.
phone out.
He's probably got his phone in his hand, it's probably already up there as we speak, so.
Oops. But there will always be.
And just, if you make a note that they have 30 days before the public comment period.
So
begins,
what
it's gonna
we'll do is on the towns, on our page, we have it up on the home page, we'll probably have something in there, a caveat that we're looking at 30 days or an
be-
endpoint.
You just by the end of February. So.
Right. Off we go.
Take care of yourself.
Anything else? Any general public questions? Any members of the general public have a question? If not, Michael, thank you.
I mean, this is kind of the planning department's puppy, but I would strongly suggest, really, all of the reports up online, and I've looked at it, I haven't looked at it, I didn't read every line, but I've looked at it throughout its whole process, and it's very well done. It's very easy to navigate, it's really, it's got, it's got, again, like suggestions and timelines and things like that, and funding sources. It's really easy to look at. I would strongly suggest that find the link in the next 30 days, especially the stakeholder, the public comment is great and important. You guys are also part of the public comment, but sort of all of the potential stakeholders are in this room. The DPW part, the port captain from, the steamship authority, the hospital, the healthcare people, the school system people, the town hall reps, that you're all right here. So I would think that within the next 30 days, pull it up, and you may not even necessarily have to look at the wildfire potential, leave that to us, but look at the stuff that's applicable to you and get your comments back, because it's been a long time in coming, and we're really close to getting that final document. So I would take a look at it. It's a very comprehensive, but it's real, it's easy to read, well organized, so it's kind of entertaining, it's pretty cool, so.
The group did that really good job. I'm not the
I got a quick.
guy to do that. But I just, before I get to the argument, I do want to mention one thing though, and that it's actually Deputy Broder and Brian Dale who started this up. I thought it was important to mention that.
My wife is a real estate agent. I turned her onto this morning, and she briefly started looking at it. But outside the parameters or the blinders of hazard, it has such a wealth of information that is multi-applicable. So, yeah, we're looking for comments, or the planning department's looking for comments, but I think if you kind of advertise it to those friends on Facebook, they say, man, this has got a lot of stuff about town. So that's my input on it.
Very good. On to our next exciting adventure.
That's the excitement, that's it.
Thanks.
That's the exciting part, thanks. We just have a little bit of LEPC business to take care of. If that is of no interest to you, you can take a few minutes and people can evacuate. It's fine.
Evacuate?
Evacuate. That's fine, I won't be offended. A little bit of quick business to take care of. Interestingly enough, Brian mentioned that, the impact that Paul Berger had on this, this whole process and this whole room, and this whole building, and a lot of other things. So, I can't say off the record because we're on the medias here, but there is more than likely going to be a ceremony in the immediate future or the near future that dedicates this room in his honor. So keep that on your radar screen. So he was he was an early proponent of this, and he's really the grandfather, he's the father of this whole thing, so we're gonna recognize that. So, two quick things. I have been approached in the last year by some people that have sort of talked about that the meeting every month is kind of a challenge. It's kind of a challenge for me. So that in order to stay topical, in order to keep everybody interested, Kim and I had sort of beat around possibly altering how we meet. We had talked about doing it every other month, or talked about sort of skipping some months. And so what we thought it would be maybe a good idea, it's always a challenge, June, July, and August. Summertimes are always tough to get everybody together. And coincidentally, the third Thursday, the third week in November, and the third week in December, Christmas and Thanksgiving almost every year fall in those times. And they're really, really tough to get people together. So we are going to propose, if that's all right with the group, it may have to go to a vote, I'm not sure, that we continue on the month with the monthly meeting, but we want everybody to be able to space it over the course of the year, so that we just omit the June, July, and August, and omit November and December, and then meet every month thereafter, if that's acceptable to the group. It's a challenge in the summertime, but that's open to discussion, so.
Chief, does that have any effect on recertification or something if we don't meet so many times a year or so?
We can no longer recertify because we are part of the REPC. Certification is for grant funding for the EPCs.
Right.
And so we are not eligible. We're in our last year of our personal certification.
So it's just a local organization now with no actual benefits from the state?
We do have benefits from the state through the REPC, so the funding that they would receive, it was $1,500 for us. The REPC would garner more money through all of the communities that are involved with them, and that filters down to us in the NOx container and all the supplies that they provide for our shelter, as well as any food or anything of that nature should we need to open the shelter. So we do still benefit, and I don't have to try and recertify every 5 years, so someone else gets to do that now, but we still benefit from that.
The answer is no. It's, we've talked about this for a while. Kim and I've got some input from people, so go ahead, Ray.
I know I have difficulty based on my schedule and everything, and I might suggest alternating months, but the June, July, and August may be problematic in that we're moving into hurricane season during those months.
I did consider that. I was, number one, there aren't going to be any hurricanes. But I did consider that, but really I think that my thought process was that the August meeting would be really dedicated to hurricane preparedness. When you're really sort of, that's really that's the beginning of it. So I did consider that, but again, it's, do we have to take a vote, Kim? Did it go that way, or is it, how many votes do I get? So anybody have any, other than Ray, anybody have any major issues with that? We want to try for a year and see how it goes?
Chief, just as a comment, I mean, obviously, because it's a flexible and more fluid requirement, I mean, you can make whatever adjustments you want, and just leave open the fact that should we have the need based on some event or some change in the roster, that you can call a meeting at any time. So I don't know that it's that critical that we commit, seeing it's not a certification issue.
Well, no, we have to vote because we need to change it in our bylaws under, open meeting law. It is publicized now that we meet monthly every fourth Thursday at 2 p.m. So we need to change that language so that we're in compliance.
I understand, I'm just saying that I'm offering an amendment that says, and as needed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
At the
That's
direction
in there.
of the head of the
For sure.
Chief, do you want a motion?
I do.
I'll make a motion.
Daniel, second it.
Thank you.
Favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Fabulous. I did see, I got an email from Captain Abston. Military Chad, you got, we do want to talk a little bit about CERT, but you got a shelter, trying to organize a shelter drill?
Yeah, the shelter committee meeting met at the beginning of the month. We want to do a drill sometime in April. I did touch base with Marcel this morning, and we're looking around like April vacation. So be all agencies involved with the sheltering operations. Just keep that in mind.
You get that memo, too?
Negative.
Okay.
Glad and happy to hear it, though. No, really. Just on a note from that, I do believe that as a CERT organization, emergency preparedness, with the town requiring the need of the shelter, I still feel confident that we're in an excellent position. The SOPs, so, you know, I like to say we try and keep it as living and viable as possible. I don't really find any real issues with it. I think our next thing is, at least Helen and I will try and visit that room and make sure that nobody else has taken over it or taken anything out of it. But other than that, I think.
I mean, we're up there, we did a walkthrough recently and everything looked pretty good.
Yeah,
So it's in pretty good shape, so.
So I don't really see any need to prepare this issue, so a drill would be the next best thing.
Do you have anything else cert-wise?
Only that through your graces and that of the town, that CERT now has what I call a CERT response vehicle, which is the old ambulance that has been very nicely appointed, and we have continued and will continue to load it with some equipment, you know, additional things.
Still working on the radios for it, but that's a work in progress. It shouldn't get too
Right,
long.
and I think with some additional work with you, Chief, and others to see, you know, to try and make it more useful for other events or other occurrences, even for nothing more than a, you know, command post get out of the weather kind of thing. And other reasons, you know, to try and get it out there where we don't really need a full CERT deployment for people to go boots on the ground in the woods or something, but we could certainly, you know, get the vehicle out there and you know, help in that fashion too. So as a spokesman for CERT, we really appreciate that. It's working out great.
DPW is all set. The assistant town manager is in the room and he brought his checkbook. So don't you worry. Those projects are just the first 10. They'll be done at the end of the week. Don't you worry. We're in good shape. I think anybody else, any other committees, communications, anybody else got anything you want to talk about? I think this plan put Hui as just one big massive hazmat thing. That's why it was only one.
Chief, maybe we can, once a year, we can do, you know, put some time into one of our meetings on the new hazard mitigation plan. Maybe talk about what was done, what was updated.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, because it's going to be
Keep it
it's
in
going to be a
the
work in
topic of
progress. And, you know,
conversation.
and some of the things that, I mean, even I looked through it for the emergency management side and the fire side, and there are a couple things about mutual aid agreements and stuff that are really effectively already done, so we can already add to that. But I think that as we can produce, even within the next 30 days, some things that we might be able to check off of that, and then moving forward as a culvert project that you guys are probably on your radar screen already. As that gets done, it goes in the folder, but then once a year, we can sort of take that whole thing out and on our own and sort of, and things may get added to it. You know, things that we things that we may identify may get added to it over the course of the next 5 years. So that's a great idea.
Yeah, I piggyback on that and maybe have conversations about how to prioritize what's in that list, because there was there was something related to the schools, and it's effectively, guess what? If this is happening, the schools aren't being used. So is it really a town issue as opposed a town priority as opposed to a school priority? So yeah, really having a deeper dive into prioritization and why something needs to go up the list in terms of going after the money as a community.
Well, I don't have anything else. So, thank you. See you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.